Hey there, welcome back. In this tutorial I will show you how to create leafy shadows in your Keyshot scene, and we will be using Midjourney to create those leaf shadows in the first place. Here you can see the three different levels of how you can create leafy shadows in your Keyshot scene. So the first level is shadow applied as a label. It's very simple, easy to control, but it only works on flat surfaces. You can use video mapping. Level 2 uses the textured spotlight to apply shadows. It's a little bit more advanced and takes more control in the scene, but it also works with video map. The last level is level 3, where you use actual 3D geometry to create the realistic shadow for your scene. And there's no video mapping, but at the end of the video I will show you an alternative of how to get very simple motion, at least, to animate the scene even at level 3. So let's go. Here we are in Midjourney. You can see the test that I made beforehand to figure out the right prompts to use to get to the results that we want to achieve. I got some pretty good results with the following prompt, which is shadow cast by lush tree on white background, bokeh panorama, white and black, low angle shot, selective focus, depth of field, and high resolution. I also set the aspect ratio to 3:2. You can also use the similar prompt, but change the type of tree that you're looking for. Is it supposed to be a palm tree? Is it supposed to be an oak tree, maple tree? If you want to be really specific about it, or if it's supposed to be a tree, do you want to focus on the leaves, the branches? So feel free to adjust according to your own ideas, wishes, and desires. I think here we are getting some quite nice images that we can use. The way Midjourney depicts it, it already appears a little bit blurry, but you can obviously do some post-editing in Photoshop if it's not exactly what you're looking for, or use other images that you find online, stock images, if you have access to them. But I like to use Midjourney to be sure that I have all the rights to use them and I don't have to worry about anything else. If you wonder about how I got to this specific prompt and the wording, I will show you how to use the describe feature in Midjourney. So you can also just do \describe, and then you will be asked to add an image. And if you have a similar image as the one that you would like to go for, you can drop it in, and Midjourney will then describe those images in 4 different ways, and you can look at those descriptions and see what words it relates to these images and try them, test out which of these words work best, and use them for your own prompting again to create similar images in the future. Another cool feature that I would like to show to you is that you can also animate the shadows for your scene. So for that, go to Genmo AI, which is an AI service that allows you to upload images and it will automatically generate a video from it. I think it's 4 seconds long. You can just link it to your Discord account, drag and drop in your image, and add a prompt to it that describes the image, and it will automatically take those images and render out a video, play around with it and test it. We will see at a later stage how I will implement this animation, so you can also use that as an animated scene inside Keyshot. This is another Midjourney image that I created to have a reference for the scene, to set things up in a nice way, to get a nice composition. Alright, here we go. This is the Keyshot scene that we have. We see the chair, applied some materials that I downloaded from Polygon. I included a floor. I also have a ceiling in here, which are just simple planes from inside Keyshot. We also have a wall on the left that includes skirting at the bottom to give it some more detail, realism, some interesting shadow maybe. We have another wall at the backside. Pressing H will pop up the HUD, so you can see how many samples do you require. I would like to suggest to use the interior mode for this example, because we are mimicking an interior scene, so we get better lighting. I would also suggest to use photographic mode in the images and adjust those settings to your preference. For myself, I will reduce the brightness of the whites a little bit and the highlights, because I will use quite extreme light. And to limit the amount of blowouts, I will reduce those, but I will also apply chromatic aberration and set the image ratio to a portrait 9 to 16 ratio. I did apply certain shapes as an opacity map to the left wall, so we get transparent sections that mimic a window. So I didn't have to model the window, I just used some sort of stencil, if you will. Okay, now I would like to start with the first way how to use leaf shadows in your project is as a label. So I'm just going to click the wall material and apply a label. But the way I do it is I use it as an opacity map rather than a color map. So I will drag in the material graph. In the material graph, you can make the necessary arrangements. We make sure to apply the label in the opacity channel rather than the diffuse channel. We remove it from the diffuse. And we have to make sure that we have to scale and position our map correctly. So if you just click on move texture and have the position pointing active, you can just click on the wall to adjust the position. We see now that the wall is black except where we have the tree shadows. So this is exactly the other way around of what we want. So we can go right click, utilities, color invert, and this will automatically invert the colors of our map. And now we have something that resembles the shadows much more. It's still completely black. So what we can do is we can adjust the brightness of our map so that the opacity is not completely vanishing. But in order to change the color of the shadows properly, we would have to change the material of the label that we apply. First, let me position it. You can play around with it as you will. One of the disadvantages of using a label for these shadows is that you have borders. Your label has a limit. You can replicate it, repeat it horizontally and vertically to avoid those labels, but you might also just go ahead and put it into Photoshop before you apply it, remove the background. With the image specifically that we have, it might look a little bit unrealistic if we just have the shadow. It looks more like a print on the wall rather than a shadow. So I recommend to decouple the scale of the label width and height and stretch your image so it looks more like a realistic shadow, because the shadow will stretch across your wall depending on where the light source is from. So in order to mimic this, just decouple width and length, width and height, and move those sliders around to get something that resembles a shadow more closely. So I'm going to make some further adjustments and tuning until I'm happy with the position. Also, one of the disadvantages of using a label for shadows is that it only works on this flat surface of the wall, right? So if I were to put the shadow of the label behind the chair, it would look even more unrealistic because the chair should also have a shadow on top of it. And in order to avoid this problem altogether, I try to position the shadow in such a way that it's not overlapping with the chair. I adjust the material of the label plastic to get a brightness that mimics the shade of shadow on this specific type of wall better and more realistically. And here now we have an interesting composition. I think you could think this is a shadow, even though it might still look a little bit flat. And now I would like to show you the implementation of the animated video, right? So I just copy the label that we used for doing the static image shadow, but then I go up there in the type and use video map instead of texture. Here I click the video and Keyshot will then automatically create the frames based on this video. So now we have to make sure that the position of our video map is correct and fits with our scene. Alright, here we go. I think this is an interesting position. It looks different from the static one because the image I use is a different one from the video. I might even like it better because we have a stronger distortion in the video from the get-go, so it's more convincing. If you open now the animation tab, pressing A in Keyshot, we see that there was automatically added a section for 4 seconds, which is exactly the length of our video. And here we can now go through the timeline and see how the shadow acts at the different timestamps. So you can go ahead and render this out. Make sure to get the right settings that you need for your idea. Use the proper locations. And be aware that rendering out animations takes a really long time. We are done with the first example of how to apply leaf shadows. We have the static image and the animated video. So for my next example, I will create a new environment that will give me sharper shadows. For this example, we will use a spotlight to create the shadows in the first place. I really like this scene, this studio. I set the settings according to the test that I did for this scene. So for yourself, just make sure everything works out in your preferred ideas, but don't necessarily stick to the numbers that I apply here, because they're very specific to the scene that I am using. Then create a sphere. You can either go up there to edit, add geometry, sphere, or press Ctrl 8 to use a short key to create a sphere. You probably have to scale it to match your scene. There we have the sphere. I like to keep it at the 0 position. And then go to the material tab, select the light, spotlight, and then you have basic and textured. Textured lights actually are spotlights with some sort of stencil, if you will. So the spotlight will generate an image with shadows for you. So if you apply it here and we pull the spotlight up, we can see the Keyshot logo is being created by this spotlight in a really nice way. So this is the effect that we would like to use for our shadow as well, for our leafy shadow. You can also pick the chair as the pivot object and move the light around it so it will always stay in the center of the light cone. So now all we have to do is adjust the position of the spotlight appropriately. I also would want to place it outside of the window, so we also include the shadow of the window itself. Also be aware that the further you go, you obviously have to increase the brightness of the light quite radically, especially if you aim for really bright light that mimics the sun and really sharper shadows all around compared to the really soft scene that we had with the label shadows. I'm switching around between different cameras to make sure that I see how the light affects the final camera, but also I have to go back and forth to be able to control the spotlight's position better and see the overall impact of the light on the scene. Now I jump into the material graph again and drag and drop my other leaf shadow example that we created in Midjourney. Put it in the color channel. We already see what the effect is of applying this texture map to the spotlight. We already have this tree branch shadow in our scene. We also see that it's being applied onto every object, also the chair itself, so it really functions as a light would by crossing the different surfaces and geometries in a natural way. I am using the geometry view to control the position of the spotlight more accurately. For that, press the O button and then it will appear. Then select your sphere, then go into the geometry view and use the move tool. I still apply the chair as the pivot, so I can rotate around without losing the focus. Now I adjust the scene to create an interesting composition. You can also adjust the cone size to make sure the entire window is being captured, or to create softer fading effects at the edges. I think in this example, this spotlight is still too close, so I push it further out. And here now we have a interesting shadow, but it's very pixelated. So we will have to go into the material graph again and adjust the size of the texture. So I drop it down until it is more representative and feels more accurate. Also use the shifting to position it while I have the final camera active. Everything else is set. But I do feel that the spotlight could be a little bit brighter. So I add another 0 at the end. My camera has a perspective of 80. I think it corresponds more with the reference image that I use to set up the scene compared to the default value of 50. If you want to know how high your sample count should be for the render settings, you can always just zoom in on the region that you think is the highest, the most difficult region that needs the most samples, and wait till you think it is rendered to an appropriate level of detail. So I think for this example 500 is sufficient. So I set my render settings to 500 samples. The cool thing about the spotlight is that I too can use video mapping here. So I can just do the same thing as we did for the label. Go to the type, apply video map, and we can use it for animating shadow in the background. Alright, now we go ahead with the last example, the last way you can use to create leaf shadows in your scene. This is by using geometry. So for this example, I make a custom HDRI. I put the background to black, total black. Go ahead and add a pin light. My idea is to mimic the sun. So for this example, I will reduce the radius of the pin light to a really small number, 0.1. I also adjust some of the fall off settings to exponential and increase the brightness to a really high number. So really go high out there to mimic the brightness of the sun. And then we just have to find the right position of our sun. So it will hit our scene in the right way to create a really interesting shadow to begin with. Now I think it's in the right position. I have this really dynamic shadow that gives me the feeling that the sun is standing at a high position. And now I just go to the cloud library, type in tree, and I can find several trees that are already modeled that I can just load in. Materials are applied already, so it's really a quick way to do exactly what we need. You can see it at the model tab on the left and find the tree there. You can just drag and drop it into your scene. And now all we have to do is position it in such a way that it captures the light, or the light goes through it and creates a shadow that will fall into our scene. This is, I would say, the most appropriate and realistic way to create those shadows, but it's also the most heavy on your scene, right? To import an object that has many leaves in there, to have Keyshot calculate all the ray bounces for the light between the scene, your room, and the tree might take more time, more storage, but also will gift you with a much more realistic image. So I keep adjusting the position and the scale of the tree until it really fits with what I'm looking for. And one of the disadvantages with the geometry using it for leafy shadows is that you cannot apply video maps here easily. If you really want to animate the shadow, you have to basically move the tree in order to create a natural movement. But you can probably not just move individual branches if they're not separated in terms of geometry, and it would take much more time and effort to get this feeling. But I will still do like a very simple movement. I will just translate the tree left and right to mimic some sort of motion. So I press A again to get the animation timeline. And if you don't see the coordinate system at the bottom left, just press Z and it should show up, so you know which axes you need to adjust for. I want the tree to move in the Z direction, and I will do the ease in and out. And then I will just mirror that motion to make sure the wind blows back and forth, or the tree branches bounce back and forth as they maybe would in a more natural wind. You might want to adjust the length of the movement. At the moment it's 1 second, just pump it up to 2 seconds. And then we also get the 4-second animation in total. Set your render settings to your liking and add things to the queue. Now I can show you all the 3 different examples of how to add leafy shadows to your Keyshot scene. I hope you enjoyed this video and hope you can use the different examples in different ways. Thank you, I hope you learned something, and see you around, amigos. Ciao, ciao.